His sharp voice sliced through the diner like a blade. "That dog is not allowed in here. Get it out now," the manager barked, jabbing a finger at the service dog lying obediently at the old man's feet. Frank, an aging veteran, gripped Rex's leash with trembling hands, the dog who had once saved his life in the heat of combat. The diner fell into a stunned silence. But just 1 hour later, an unexpected turn of events unfolded that no one could have foreseen. What do you think of this treatment? If you find it unfair, type 1 in the comments and share this story to spread awareness. The morning sun cast long golden shadows across Frank Miller's weathered face as he fastened Rex's service vest with care. At 72, the retired Army veteran moved with a deliberate slowness, his joints stiffened by arthritis, a painful memento from decades of service in harsh terrains. His hands, once steady enough to defuse explosives under enemy fire, now shook slightly as he clipped on Rex's leash. "Just you and me again today, buddy," Frank murmured, his voice carrying the gentle rasp of age and the quiet solitude that had settled in since his wife, Martha, passed 3 years ago. Rex, a German shepherd trained as a military service dog, had become his entire world. During their final deployment, Rex had detected an ambush that would have wiped out Frank's unit, pulling him to safety with unwavering loyalty. Now, in retirement, Rex was his anchor, helping him navigate the invisible wounds of PTSD that still haunted his dreams decades later. Their morning ritual was a sacred routine, a slow walk through Willow Park, Frank's cane tapping a steady rhythm alongside Rex's patient stride. The crisp air and rustling leaves offered a fleeting peace. Today, however, Frank felt a spark of curiosity. "Let's try that new diner on Maple Lane," he told Rex, who tilted his head attentively, ears perked. As they approached the crosswalk, Frank noticed an elderly man struggling with his walker, hesitating at the curb. Without a second thought, he stepped forward. "Need a hand, sir?" Frank asked, his military courtesy as polished as ever. "Thank you, son," the man replied, gratitude in his eyes as he accepted Frank's arm. He glanced at Rex with admiration. "What a fine, well-behaved dog." Frank smiled proudly. "Rex is my service dog, been with me through thick and thin." After ensuring the man's safety, Frank and Rex continued toward Maple Diner, a cozy spot that had been buzzing with positive reviews since its opening last month. The hostess greeted them with a warm smile as they entered at 10:47 a.m. "Table for one, please," Frank said politely. "Somewhere quiet, if possible." "Rex will stay under the table. He's fully trained." She nodded, leading them to a corner booth away from the morning rush. Frank settled into the seat, his cane resting against the table, while Rex positioned himself neatly beneath, completely out of the walkway. A young waiter, no older than 20, took Frank's order, a simple stack of pancakes and black coffee, and everything seemed perfectly normal. The soft hum of conversation and the clink of cutlery filled the air until manager Lisa Carter noticed them, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line as she watched from across the room. With determined steps, her heels clicking sharply against the tile floor, she marched toward Frank's table. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice deliberately loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Pets are not allowed in this establishment." Frank looked up, startled by her tone. "Ma'am, Rex isn't a pet. He's a certified service dog," he explained, reaching for his wallet to produce the documentation. "I have his papers right here. This is a restaurant, not a kennel." Lisa interrupted, her voice rising with authority. "I don't care what papers you have. You need to remove that animal immediately." Frank's face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and frustration as diners began to turn their heads. "Ma'am, under the Americans with Disabilities Act, service animals are permitted—" "Out!" Lisa snapped, cutting him off again. She reached down and grabbed Rex's leash, yanking it slightly. Rex whimpered at the sudden movement, pressing closer to Frank's legs. The veteran's hands began to tremble more noticeably, his breathing growing shallow as the familiar tightness of anxiety gripped his chest, a sensation he hadn't felt this intensely since the battlefield. "Please," Frank said quietly, his voice strained. "Don't touch his leash. He's trained to help me." I don't care what he's trained for, Lisa retorted, her tone icy. Either the dog goes or you both do. The diner fell into a heavy silence. Patrons at nearby tables exchanged uncomfortable glances, but no one spoke up. A young couple at the next table snickered behind their menus, whispering something about entitled old folks. Frank's shoulders slumped under the weight of the moment. He placed his napkin on the table and rose slowly, his movements deliberate despite the ache in his bones. "Come on, Rex," he murmured softly, his voice barely audible. Lisa stood with arms crossed, a triumphant glint in her eyes. "If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the police," she warned. Frank bowed his head, the pain evident in his eyes as he gently tugged Rex's leash and began to walk away from the untouched table. Lisa followed closely behind, unwilling to let the matter drop. "People like you think the rules don't apply," she hissed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Who gave you permission to bring a dog into my restaurant?" Frank remained silent, his jaw clenched tight, focusing only on making a dignified exit. "Do you know how many health codes you're violating?" she continued, her voice rising with each step. "I could report you. I could have this place shut down because of you." The absurdity of her claims, decades of military discipline had taught him when battles were worth fighting, and this wasn't one of them. Around him, the diner remained uncomfortably quiet. A businessman in a tailored suit shook his head disapprovingly, not at Lisa, but at Frank. A mother pulled her curious child closer, as though Rex might somehow be a danger despite his perfect behavior. "Some people just want special treatment," a woman whispered to her companion, not bothering to lower her voice. "If we all brought our pets in here, imagine the mess." Frank's ears burned with each comment. These were the same people who plastered "Support our troops" stickers on their cars, who stood and applauded in airports when uniformed soldiers passed by. But when it actually mattered, when a veteran needed simple dignity and respect, they remained silent, or worse, they joined in the mockery. As Frank reached the door, a teenage server who had been watching the scene unfold approached Lisa. "Miss Carter, I think that's a service dog," he said tentatively. "They're actually allowed—" "Mind your own business, Ethan," Lisa snapped, cutting him off. "Get back to work before I write you up." The young man hesitated, then retreated to the kitchen, casting an apologetic glance at Frank's back as he shuffled out. Outside, the bright sunlight felt harsh and exposing. Frank paused on the sidewalk, suddenly unsure where to go. His hand trembled more violently now, as the adrenaline of the confrontation coursed through his system. Rex pressed against his leg, offering steady pressure, a technique the dog had been trained to use during anxiety attacks. Through the diner window, Frank could see life returning to normal inside. Lisa was already seating a new party at his abandoned table, laughing as though nothing had happened. No one looked out at the old veteran standing alone on the sidewalk. "It's all right, boy," Frank whispered to Rex, though his voice cracked slightly. "We'll find somewhere else. I'm sorry, everyone." Reading this far makes my heart ache. How could someone who once wore a uniform, who sacrificed for his country, be treated this way? If you also find this unfair, type "unfair" in the comments to speak up for justice and honor. Frank had only taken a few steps away from the diner when the door behind him burst open. "Sir! Sir, please wait!" He turned slowly, his expression guarded. A young man in his early 30s was jogging toward him, still wearing a server's apron. It was Ethan, the server who had tried to intervene. "Sir," Ethan said, slightly out of breath, "I'm so sorry about what happened in there. That wasn't right." Frank nodded politely, but continued walking, his cane tapping the pavement. He'd had enough humiliation for one day. "Please, just give me a minute," Ethan persisted, keeping pace. "I recognize you and Rex." This stopped Frank in his tracks. He turned, studying the younger man's face more carefully. "Afghanistan, 2012, Ethan continued, his voice lowering with reverence. "3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. You were there with the recon unit." Frank's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. "You were a Marine?" "Yes, sir," Ethan replied, standing a little straighter, military bearing returning instinctively. "Corporal Ethan Brooks. I never forget a face, especially not one that saved my life. Rex sniffed out that IED cache before we rolled over it. If not for you two, my squad would have been gone." Inside the diner, the confrontation had drawn the attention of several customers, who were now watching through the windows, their curiosity piqued. Lisa emerged from the kitchen, her face darkening when she spotted Ethan talking to Frank. "Brooks," she called sharply, "get back inside now, or you're fired." The diner fell silent once more, but this time with a different quality, a tension mixed with a growing sense of awe. Ethan continued, emotion breaking through his voice. "In Helmand Province, we were on patrol when Rex detected an IED buried in the road. If not for him and his handler, my entire squad would have been blown to pieces. I wouldn't be standing here today." Lisa's face drained of color, her earlier confidence faltering. "I didn't know." "You didn't ask," Ethan cut her off, his tone firm. An older customer stood up slowly from his table, his movements deliberate. "I served in Vietnam," he said quietly, his voice carrying weight. "We know what it's like to come home to people who don't understand." He turned to Lisa, his gaze steady. "You should be ashamed. This man sacrificed everything, and you treat him like this." Another diner rose, a middle-aged woman with a subtle army pin on her jacket. "My daughter's in the army now," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I'd hope someone would show her more respect than you've shown this gentleman." One by one, other customers began to stand. Some were veterans themselves, their service etched in the lines of their faces. Others had family members who served. The atmosphere in the diner had transformed completely, the air thick with a newfound respect. An hour later, Frank was sitting on a bench across the street, still processing the morning's events, when a black SUV pulled up with a low rumble. 4 soldiers in crisp dress uniforms stepped out, followed by a lieutenant colonel with silver hair and a commanding presence. They approached Frank with purposeful strides. "Staff Sergeant Miller?" the lieutenant colonel asked, his voice respectful. Frank stood instinctively, his posture straightening despite his age and the ache in his joints. "Yes, sir." "Word travels fast in our community," the officer explained, extending his hand. "Corporal Brooks called his old commanding officer, who contacted me. It would be an honor if you'd join us for lunch, Staff Sergeant." The Marines formed a line and in perfect unison rendered a crisp salute to the veteran. As they escorted Frank back toward the diner, they formed a protective formation around him and Rex, their presence a silent testament to the brotherhood that endured. Lisa stood frozen at the entrance, watching as they approached. Frank didn't show pride or anger. He simply nodded gently in acknowledgement, then followed the Marines inside with Rex faithfully at his side. As they entered, the diner had transformed once more. The same diners who had earlier watched his humiliation in silence now stood as he passed, a gesture of respect that required no words. Ethan, who had in then and now. Frank returned the salute, his hands steady for the first time that day, a faint smile breaking through his stoic expression. One by one, the other patrons in the diner rose to their feet, not in military precision, but in a wave of silent acknowledgment. Even those who had whispered and snickered earlier now bowed their heads in respect, their earlier indifference replaced by a humbling realization. Lisa stood near the register, her earlier arrogance replaced by evident shame. As Frank passed, she opened a mouth to speak, but found no words adequate for the moment. Frank paused, briefly, looking at her, not with anger but with quiet dignity. Then, with Rex at his side, he walked to the table the Marines had reserved, where a fresh plate of pancakes and coffee awaited. The meal that followed was subdued, but filled with a deep sense of camaraderie. The lieutenant colonel shared stories of Frank's service, drawing nods from the other Marines who had heard of his bravery. Frank spoke little, but when he did, his voice carried the weight of experience, tales of dust-choked patrols, the trust between soldier and dog, and the quiet moments that defined their bond. Outside, the black SUV remained parked, a symbol of the support that had arrived just in time. As they finished, the elderly man Frank had helped earlier approached with the small American flag. "For your service," he said simply, having heard the story from others. Frank's eyes glistened as he accepted it with a gentle nod. "Some people never ask to be remembered," he murmured, "but we owe them all the respect we can give." In the weeks that followed, Maple Diner underwent a quiet transformation. Lisa was replaced as manager after the incident drew local attention, and a new sign was hung, "Maple Diner, a place for heroes." A corner table was reserved for veterans, marked with a small plaque reading, "No one stands alone." Ethan, despite losing his job, found work at a veteran-owned cafe, where he often shared Frank's story with new customers. Frank and Rex became regulars, greeted with smiles and free coffee. The community rallied, hosting a Veteran Appreciation Day where Frank was asked to speak. Standing with Rex beside him, he told the crowd, "It's not the uniform that makes a soldier, it's the loyalty, the courage to stand when others won't." As the months passed, Willow Park saw more veterans walking with service dogs, their presence now met with nods of respect rather than suspicion. A local charity began funding service dog training, inspired by Frank and Rex. Some heroes, he knew, never stopped serving, whether in uniform or with a loyal companion at their side. Subscribe to Valor Echoes if you believe kindness and honor should be protected, because loyalty, human or canine, never fades.